I have to profess, as you're sharing these things, it's breaking my heart, because what my people have done, what the Jewish people have done, is instead of proclaiming the name to the Gentiles, even when Gentiles came to them and said, what is the name? We've perpetrated this cover-up. And I called my book Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. And where that comes from is this rabbinical concept that the name is too holy to pronounce, that not only can't Gentiles know about it, but even Jews must not speak this name. It must be kept hidden. And if you trace this back to its origins, and I talked there in my book about half the story, and I had to actually cut this because there wasn't enough room in the book. Mm-hmm. But the other half of the story is Roman persecution, and that was a key part of it. The Romans wanted to wipe out Judaism. They forbade the Jews to speak God's holy name. But there was another internal reason why the rabbis banned the name. Now, the first time anybody says in outside of the, let's say, the Essenes and the Samaritans, the first time in rabbinical Judaism that anybody banned the name it appears in the Mishnah around the year 150 in the name of a rabbi named Abba Shaul. And this is in Sanhedrin 10:1, and he says, even one who pronounces the name according to its letters has no portion in the world to come, which is a pretty heavy statement. Meaning I grew up with this concept. I mean, in Christian terms, what he's saying there is a person who speaks God's name, who actually says the name Yehovah, has no salvation. Meaning they don't use that term, so that's Christian terminology. Right. Mm-hmm. But in the Jewish terminology of this period, they start out saying all Israel has a portion in the world to come. And then there's a list of exceptions. These don't have a portion in the world to come. And why don't they? Because they violated certain rabbinical prohibitions, right? That's what gets you banned from the world to come. And the world to come, the image there is I think what a lot of Christians would call the millennial kingdom. In other words, the Jewish understanding is the Messiah will come, be a flesh and blood king over the earth. He'll defeat the enemies of Israel, gather in the exiles, and bring peace to the world. And under his reign, we will all have a portion in that world, in that kingdom. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, if you speak God's name, the rabbis are saying this around the year 150, then you will not have a portion in the world to come. Now, what most people do, and I'll admit that I'm, part of this, I've read that and usually focus on those words and you say, okay, it's an absolute prohibition to speak God's name. There was this Israeli scholar named Ephraim Orbach, and he wrote this massive book. It was like 600 pages or something. He has footnotes that are 10 pages. I mean, this guy is a genius. He's considered the foremost expert in rabbinical Judaism. He wrote a book called The Sages. And in The Sages, he has like a 5-page footnote or something where he explains this statement of Abba Shaul in its historical context. And he says, you can't just start with Abba Shaul, start at the beginning of the passage. And the beginning of the passage of the Mishnah is, these have no portion in the world to come. They list different people. And one of the people who has lost their salvation, in Christian terms, is those who read the outside books. And the Talmud explains outside books refers to the Gospels. Isn't that interesting? It's not a Torah prohibition, but the rabbis made this proclamation. Anyone who reads these outside books, and they call them in the Talmud there, Evangelion, which is gospel.
Question, the Gospels.
It's actually the Greek word for gospel, Evangelion. Mm-hmm. Anybody who reads these outside books has no portion in the world to come. And then it says, and those who whisper over a wound saying, and then it quotes the verse, Exodus 15:26, all the diseases I placed on Egypt I will not place on you, for I am the Lord who heals you. So there were people who were praying over those who were sick. In other words, they didn't have medicine like we have today. Not that that's always so great. But they didn't have any kind of, they didn't understand disease. The best you could do is pray over somebody. And the way that Jews often pray is by whispering. So for example, you see Hannah, who's in the tabernacle. And at the time, this wasn't a common practice. So the priest Eli sees her and he says, are you drunk? You're muttering under your breath. She says, no, I'm praying. So the rabbis make the statement, they said somebody who whispers over a wound, quoting a Bible verse, has no portion in the world to come. Why is that? That's strange. And the answer is that the rabbis saw that this was working. People were praying over the sick, and they were being healed, and the rabbis couldn't do it. So they said, if you do that, you have no portion in the world to come. And it's in that context that Abba Shaul says, even one who pronounces the name according to its letters, meaning as part of a prayer for the sick. There were people who were healing in the name in the 2nd century, around the year 150. And the rabbis say, if you do that, if you heal in the name, actually pronouncing the name, Yud-He-Vav-He, the way it's pronounced, Yehovah, then you have no portion in the world to come. You've lost your Jewish salvation. Why? They don't say why, but apparently it's because they couldn't do it themselves.
Okay, so you have where this prohibition begins, and where we say the people that have no part in the world to come are those who are reading the Gospels.
Well, now those may be separate categories.
Maybe, but
or
again,
they may overlap.
He said, what's the context?
Right, they may overlap. And
right.
And one of the pieces of evidence that they overlap. Now, of course, in the New Testament, you have people healing in the name of Jesus, or I guess Yeshua.
Right.
And there's a great story in the Talmud about a certain rabbi who was bitten by a snake.
Okay.
And he's on the verge of death. And a believer in Yeshua comes to heal him in the name of Yeshua. And he refuses the healing and dies. And he's held up in the Talmud as a holy martyr because he refused to be healed in that name, in the name Yeshua, which is like unbelievable. Like the rabbis aren't denying that there's Jews who can heal in that name Yeshua. They're just saying we don't want any part of that, which is, it's unbelievable.
Right.
So what we know from other sources is there were people who were healing in the name of Yehovah. I mean, we know that first of all from here, from the Mishnah.
Right.
They were healing in the name of Yehovah. And those may have been just regular Jews, the Jewish multitudes who didn't obey the Pharisees. They just read the scriptures and they read the verse. All the diseases I placed on Egypt, I will not place on you, for I am Yehovah who heals you. It's what it says. And in their desperation for a sick person, they'd pray over somebody and they'd say that verse, and the rabbis would see somebody healed and say, that's forbidden. We can't have that outside of our power.
Okay, now you're reading this actually from a Hebrew text, right? This testimony.
This is the Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:1, and the other references in the Talmud. These are Jewish sources from this period, from around the 2nd century. Now, there's a Greek source, and it's actually a Greek pagan source.
Okay, got to listen to this, folks. This is incredible.
It's amazing. So it's called, scholars refer to it as the Hebraicos Logos. It's what we would call witchcraft. And you might say, why are we looking at witchcraft? The way it's described in this papyrus written in Egypt around the same time, 150, 200, and you have to understand, this is a long papyrus called the Great Leiden, Leiden's in Holland, the Great Leiden Magical Papyrus. And it has all kinds of
Magical papyrus.
Magical papyrus has all kinds of incantations and spells, and they're in the name of Horus and Isis and every pagan thing you can imagine. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this papyrus, they say, this is a really powerful spell because these are Hebrew words. And they actually say in Greek, Hebraicos Logos, Hebrew words. Now, what are the words? They say a bunch of words that sound like complete gibberish, and they say other words that we can clearly make out as Hebrew words. For example, they refer to the great god Sabaoth. Well, what's Sabaoth? Obviously, that's Sivaot, which is the Hebrew word that we usually translate as of hosts. They have other words that are clearly some kind of corruption of Hebrew words, and you have to imagine there's some pagan who's heard a Jew pray over a sick person, saw the sick person healed, and said, I want to do that.
Right.
And that got passed on from pagan to pagan to pagan until he wrote it down in some confused form. But they're testifying essentially, and they actually say at the end of the Hebraicos Logos, it says this works, it's been tested. Right? It's pretty cool. So in other words, they saw a Jew, or maybe even a Jew who believed in Yeshua, praying over a sick person and get healed, and they say, we can do this, right? I mean, it's just like Simon Magus in the New Testament. He says, whoa, you guys can do that? How do I do that? I'll pay for it. In this case, he's not paying for it. He's just overheard it. And the interesting thing is some of the words are complete gibberish. Why are they gibberish? Because they were Hebrew words. And the Greek guy doesn't know what those words are. It's kind of like when you hear a foreign language and, if somebody speaks to you in a foreign language, what did I just say? I don't know. It was foreign language. Well, what are the words? Forget what they mean. I don't even know what words you spoke. I can't even detect where the word began. One word began, another ended, or what the sounds were, right? So in this Hebraicos Logos, one of the words that appears over and over and over is the name Yud-He Vav-He. And it appears in all kinds of strange forms. And why, so it appears as Yahuwah, Ya'o, Ya'u, Ya'ah. And the point is the Greeks heard these sounds and they weren't sure how to write them in Greek. So they said, hey, let's try to get all these. Let's try to write this in every conceivable form so we'll get it some way, right? This is what happens when pagans try to represent, when Gentiles try to represent the name of God, especially in Greek, which is a language which is not suited at all for the name. The name is Yud, He, Vav, He. There's no H sound in Greek in the middle of a word. You have an aspirate at the beginning, but in the middle of a word, H doesn't exist as a sound.
Right.
V doesn't exist as a sound. So you have three of the consonants that are pronounced, the final one silent, Yehovah, and two of them can't be pronounced. The first one you can, I guess, represent as a iota, and they're pretty, which is like an I. They're pretty consistent representing it as an I. But the next two letters, there's no way to write in Greek. And you have all kinds of bizarre ways of representing the name in Greek. So in the Hebraicos Logos, one of the names that appears alongside Ya'u and Ya'o and all these in Ya'u'e, all these pronunciations is the name Jesus, which is the Greek representation of Yeshua. And you got to really wonder, so they say these are Hebrew words, and so clearly they heard a Jew healing in the name, Yud He Vav He, but it sounds like they also heard someone healing using the name Yeshua and Yehovah at the same time, which then ties back to the rabbi saying, well, if you heal in that name, you have no portion in the world to come. That's how it ties into people who read the outside books. So they're reading the Gospels, and they're healing in the name Yehovah, and then they end up healing in the name Yeshua. We got to just ban the name altogether. That's what happened in rabbinical Judaism, right? It was this slippery slope, which they saw these things happening in front of their eyes. They said, we can't control this. We better ban it. So back to the Gnostic Apocryphon of John with this a serious scholar.
So the only ones left really speaking the name are believers in Yeshua, really, who are actually healing people.
According to these sources, I wasn't there, but that's what the sources record.
Oh, okay, so this is coming from Jewish sources. And from a Jew.
These are Jewish sources. I didn't make the sources up. They're there. They're clearly talking about it. And the other one is a second witness from a pagan source, meaning there was rabbis saying this, and there were Greek pagans both saying that people who called the name Yud He Vav He, Yehovah, and the name Yeshua were healing in those names. And one said, we got to ban this. The other said, we want to do that. The pagan said that. So the point is that it's kind of interesting. You have two different witnesses who are talking about the same thing.